Welcome to Design Dispatches, where regularly I talk to distinguished members of the design community about how they're coping and what they might envisage for the future of design. And today I'm joined by Paul Priestman, who is a travel and transport designer, among many other things, who set up PriestmanGoode in 1989, since when more than 60 designers now work in London for that design consultancy, but they have offices in London and China. Yep. They've won everything from a Queen's Award for industry or enterprise, and are regularly voted amongst the most influential designers currently working, not just in Britain, but globally. They've worked for all sorts of different people, from Airbus, Boeing, Lufthansa, Qatar Airways to Motel 6. And of course, recently, they did a project at the Design Museum where they did a scooter for life for the elderly in the New Old exhibition, and also a project called Get On Board, which looked at the wastage generated by the airline industry, and with a particular focus on how we might have a more sustainable approach to airline food. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
It's an odd segue to ask what your cultural landscape is now, but I'm particularly curious for someone who spent so much time thinking about travel and designing around travel, as to how you're coping in isolation and what you're listening to or reading or watching.
It is an extraordinary time, as everyone says. It's a very repeated sort of phrase. But no, interestingly, because we work in so many different areas of the transportation sector, particularly trains and mass transit, we do a lot of work in China and designing trains all over the world. And certain sectors have really sort of accelerated in some respects as people think about different ways of travel. So particularly in the Far East, there's a lot of development going on new trains and the design of new trains, which we do all the time. But also, it's interesting that just last week we won another project to design a train, just a completely new contract. So I've been designing trains all weekend actually. And
so basically you have no time to do any reading or watching or listening. You're working.
Well, yeah, I suppose like many people, I used to travel almost on a weekly basis. But now, because I am staying in one location, I'm doing a lot of the meetings. And I find that my day is pretty rammed, actually. It's extraordinary. But also, what I found quite interesting about this recent project we've won, we would not have been able to do that so quickly. And even the client said, isn't it amazing, because we're available, that we're able to communicate, discuss, and get to the point almost on a daily basis, when previously we would have been traveling to different parts of the world. So some things have accelerated so that we've been able to come to an agreement and start working on a project much more quickly than previously.
It sounds as if you've managed to adapt your working conditions, specifically the space, reasonably effectively. Is that the case?
Yeah, we're very fortunate as a company because we are able to, well, most of our work is computer based. So we were able to plan ahead and actually do some tests of people working remotely. And I must admit, the transition has been pretty seamless, actually. We have people working in different parts of the world, in New Zealand, in Korea. So we've almost had that sort of area of working already. And now, we have about 60 designers now. And so we are working sort of collectively, but remotely. And it's quite an interesting process. And in some respects, I think it's quite effective.
When you travel, do you work as you travel? A lot of people find airlines or trains great places in which to work. In some ways, that's the subject that you're actually considering. So it might be too close for comfort. Are you missing that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that designers really need to do is think deeply. And I always refer to, this fact that a lot of people's research is the first or second page of Google, when really you need to, as designers, that's what we do. We problem solve, we make things better. And to actually have time to really think about a subject without interruption is what we should do as designers. And one of my big concerns in society generally is that people aren't thinking deeply. They're not able to have a deep train of thought without a bomb going off of their computer or a pop-up which interrupts their thoughts. And I do believe that creativity comes from one side of the brain, And I find that if I'm having a creative thought or a development, and then some financial thing pops up, it kills that creative thought. So to have the luxury to actually have constant creative thinking, deep thinking, is a real luxury, but it's also something that we have to do as designers.
You're not getting off the hook about your cultural landscape. You can tell us you're working all the time, and I believe you to some extent. But what about other cultural pursuits? I mean, do you read for pleasure extensively?
I look for pleasure. I must admit, I'm not a great reader, but I do study and look and learn. I listen to music constantly. So I'm really into things like Mahler at the moment. It's a bit grim, but I mean, it's a bit serious. But I mean, I love that again, being able to listen to an album from stop to start, and just it's sort of being enveloped by a feeling and a mood, which is something that I don't, up till now, haven't really been able to do at any length, which is really interesting. Yeah.
So Mahler specifically, and music in general, isn't background for you. You actually immerse yourself in it. So it's not necessarily something you have on the background when you're working.
I do have it when I'm working. I don't. I like sound. I like music, whether it's whatever the radio. But depending on my mood, yes, it is really interesting to get involved in a piece as I'm designing, as I'm being creative. But the other thing is that looking at things, I'm sure many people have understood that or seen that spring has happened. And to actually being able to look, I have a window, luckily, and looking out onto some greenery, and actually being able to watch spring happen. And, I've never really done that before, which is really interesting. Seeing the buds open, it's almost seeing the plants emerge before your eyes. And again, it's a really interesting, it's a very creative, inspiring thing to see.
How might that play into the designs that you work on in the future? Have you any idea how that might play out? I mean, this slow looking, slow eating idea is quite pervasive, but I don't know about slow design.
Well, it's quite interesting because we do get employed by cities and sort of railway network infrastructure companies to look at mass transit and public transport. And there was a theme that I've been looking at, which was actually called "What's the Rush?" Thinking that if people are working, remotely, working from home, and their day of work has changed, what is the rush to get to a place? What if you're able to work as you travel, as you said, get inspired as you travel? So the traveling process is part of your working day. And I find that that's very interesting because, what's wrong with taking the slow lane or taking the more picturesque route? And I think we tend to end up designing very high-speed pieces of transport, but there is the other side of an aging population. Could there be different ways of treating travel? It's just part of the working day, and you're doing things as you travel. But sort of travel is almost a byproduct of the enjoying the moment.
If we go back to the beginnings of your career,
Yeah.
When did you first realize you wanted to be a designer? Was that something from childhood?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I wasn't great academically at school, and I had quite an inspiring ceramics teacher and I got into really got into ceramics in a big way, and I was able to model models of objects, which I found I could sell quite well to teachers and to parents. So I started to get quite interested in that side of things. I then went to art school, and I went to Central St. Martin's and found that it wasn't actually the material that I was fascinated, it was actually the process. So I went into other materials, and then I discovered something called product design, industrial design, and went to carried on at Central, ended up at the Royal College of Art, and then that's where I sort of took off, really.
Is there still a hands-on element to what you do, or has industrial design by definition made you always think in bigger terms, larger scale?
I mean, I've always been interested in the bigger projects, I must admit, the idea of sort of designer maker was something that I realized that if you went that route, you wouldn't be able to design such amazing objects as trains or aeroplanes or, really amazing pieces of engineering and design. So my route was to build up a larger company so that we were able to do that. But I'm still an absolute hands-on designer. When you're making anything or designing anything, you have to really think about how, if you're designing a seat for a train or an aeroplane or whatever, you have to think about the ergonomics. You mock it up, you model it, you try it. It's not just computer, it's very hands-on.
And drawing, are you sketching a lot all the time?
Yes, yeah. I mean, drawing is absolutely key. I think it's the way that designers communicate to each other. It's not through words; it's through drawing. They talk through drawings, and that's still the quickest way to communicate what's inside your head to another person. I mean, of course, it can be done on a tablet, but on paper, I use a lot, and I'm always drawing. And that's one of my main relaxations, which I do miss actually, is actually going out and drawing and sketching. Which obviously I can't do at the moment.
No. Which designers had the biggest impact on you early in your career?
I think it was, artists particularly. A great fan of people, early on, and Henry Moore, and of course, the famous one, Buckminster Fuller. I was really into geodesic domes at one point, and was fascinated by those forms and the mathematics of them. But I suppose it was always people that were problem solving, making things better. It wasn't just styling somehow. Design for me is not just styling. It's about making things better, improving, and making things better for people's lives. And that's something that we've been able to do all the time.
Is there a design, a specific project that had the most significant impact on your career? I mean, or could you articulate? And it's very difficult to ask people in terms of their own career, but is there something that you were responsible for that had a huge significance on the subsequent career that you had?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, going back to when I was at the Royal College of Art, when I graduated, many years ago, in the late 80s, I mean, it's years and years ago, I did actually, at that time, I had to design some radiators. And I'm still designing radiators, which is really interesting. And one particular radiator called Hot Spring was an immensely successful product. And so it's interesting how even something from college can continue to influence you all the way through. I also, whilst I was at Royal College, I was fortunate to win some quite big international design competitions. And one of them was in Japan. And whilst I was at college, I was actually flown out to meet and receive the award. And I met a company called Hitachi. And we're still working with Hitachi to this day, which is just absolutely incredible. So early things sometimes remain. But I think that's one of the, I think is most important in design is consistency, of being consistently good, consistent of high quality. And if you can maintain that, then I think these relationships can last for many, many years. But I think, some of the big projects that were sort of career changing for PriestmanGoode were when we won the contract to design the first mock-up of the interior of the A380. And that was a game changer for us, because we designed it and then built a full-size mock-up in Toulouse. And then every airline in the world went to see this mock-up. And Airbus very kindly let us put our name on this particular mock-up. And the rest, we then moved heavily into working with airlines. So that was a big moment for us. And then the subsequent A350s and the A330s that we've worked with Airbus, again, for many, many years, designing their interiors.
It's interesting because your portfolio and PriestmanGoode's portfolio is so broad. I mean, I said travel and transport, but it can't be linear. But hearing you talk, you suggest there's a linearity in terms of quality and achievement will lead on to the next potential project or commission. But is it always like starting with a blank sheet of paper, each significant new project?
Yeah, in some respects, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that when we started working in the aviation sector, it was quite interesting that a hotel chain saw the work we're doing on interiors of aircraft and said, well, I wonder if these guys could look at interiors of hotels. And that's when we designed Yotel, the first Yotels, the rooms for them. And from that, then we started working in cruise ships, because someone saw the work we're doing in that and then in cruise ships. And what we thought is that why rely on someone else making that leap? Why don't we actually do the leap ourselves? So we're in control of our destiny. So that if we wanted to move into a particular area, why don't we do a project that leads people's thought in that direction? So for instance, you know, the great project we did with the Design Museum, with the Scooter for Life, which is thinking about mobility and the aging population, the aging demographic. We were very keen to do that. This was a lovely project to do. And the result of that is that we started working in different areas in that area. So I suppose it's sort of guiding, it's sort of steering the direction you want to end up in. Because if you don't, you might accidentally end up in an area that you don't want to be in. So why not actually pursue it and push it?
For someone who's designed hotel rooms and interiors, I wonder how consistent your own work and living spaces are, and how much your own taste has evolved and changed in relationship to the projects you do. I mean, looking at the background, you seem a minimalist, but that's probably just the aesthetics of an interview, a very good one too, not distracting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hilarious seeing all of these eminent people on TV now with their funny little dogs and things in the background. I didn't want to. I think it's yeah. I mean, definitely. My thoughts about what is appropriate in design, certainly from the environmental point of view, has changed considerably. And that's something that I'd like to think that we bring into every project we do, is thinking about the overall impact of what we're doing to the environment, and how we can help companies do things in a better way for the planet. And you know, I think it is not sad, but it's often the designer's responsibility to bring that onto the table and bring it into the discussion. When, you know, so we're constantly looking at what we can do and how we can bring these elements into these very complex and big projects.
We're asking everyone, if in design dispatches, whether they have an object close to hand that whose design they admire, and the object itself is something that means something personal to them. Have you got an object for us?
Well, it's more of a little project I've been doing myself. I mean, I'm sure everybody's got, I call it my phone arm, aching arm, because I'm like this the whole day, or like this. So I had an old wine box, and what I've been doing, I've been developing these series of prototypes, which are to actually put the phone on so that it's at the right angle whilst I'm speaking, and I can put it on the desk, and it actually still keeps the charger in place. So I'm developing these little prototypes to so that people can actually make one for home. So that, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because people aren't really aware of the angle that they're you know, you get these things and people taking, you know, doing these conferences, and you're looking up their tummy or something, or up their nose, when really if you could design a little object which sort of gives it the perfect shot every time, and you don't have to hold your arm up, then it's and also made out of something recycled. So this is something I've just been thinking about. So that's what I'm thinking about at the moment. It's always the newest thing that I'm thinking about.
I love that idea. Not that it's something that you've had with you for a long time, but you're always thinking about the next project. Can we see it again? Because I'm not going to share how my phone is propped up for you, but it's propped up on a whole range of books. And
yeah, I mean, it's
that looks a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's quite interesting that you know, people are using their kids' Lego to hold up their phones or their screens, or plasticine or whatever. But yeah, so this is evolved. It's evolved from a very basic one into a slightly more. But it's sort of problem solving. As you know, often if you have to swipe your phone, the phone falls over. So just thinking about the physicality of that and how you solve those problems, but also something made out of recycled material. So those are sorts of, yeah, it's just like mulling it over, and then I go and make another one and then come back and see if it works better. But that's the whole point of design. You see a problem, you problem solve, you improve it, you make lots of prototypes, and then end up with something which is incredibly minimal. So I've got 4 pieces of plywood here, so I'm trying to get it down to 2, but I'll see how I get on.
We might ask you, well, I'm going to ask you now, whether you consider doing a workshop on actually a public design of a phone holder.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I'd love to do it. Yeah, because I just need to. Because at the moment, I'm trying to design it so you don't need any specialist tools. I think that's the next thing, because if someone's going to make it on their kitchen table, they're not going to have a drill and maybe, maybe a saw, but I'm just going to think maybe one or two objects that most people have in their toolbox or at the back of the cupboard. But also, whether it could be made out of cardboard packaging that you've got your latest delivery from, and just make it out of that, using the corner of a box, which has already got the structure, and then you just have to cut it. So those are the sorts of things I'm thinking about. And then, then you can decorate it with all your different colors and things. Yeah.
And you have to polish off at least 6 bottles of wine to get that recyclable material. So it's a hell of a sacrifice.
That's the excuse. Yeah, that's the excuse. Yeah.
Do you, when this awful crisis is over, what building in the world would you most like to revisit soon after, and why?
Gosh, that's a difficult one, actually. I won't choose a building. I very fortunately was able to plant a forest in Northumberland about 12 years ago, 100,000 trees. And they're all growing, and some of them are getting pretty big. So I really miss seeing the trees, I must admit. So the first thing I'd like to do is to go and see the trees and see them growing. Because the great thing about trees is that once you've planted and you've taken away, cattle or sheep that are going to eat them, they just go for it. And it's amazing how quickly wildlife comes back. I've got an amazing photograph of a fence with sheep on one side and then trees that we've planted on the other, and it's like completely different. The wildlife, the flowers on one side, the trees, the birds, and then the other side is just nibbled grass. And I find that very encouraging, very rewarding to see, just in 11, 12 years, what a difference you can make to a piece of land and the wildlife, just by simply, planting trees or doing something and taking things that will eat that wildlife away.
As someone who's been involved in placemaking, as you have, and looking at infrastructures of cities and so on, I mean, it's unfair, but you do spend a lot of time looking at how the future might unfold. What are your thoughts at the moment in that regard? I mean, I love your rewilding idea, actually. That's what the forest is in a sense. But how are we looking at the city 4 weeks into this lockdown?
Well, I mean, there's an area which I find very interesting, which is that it's the melding of public and private transport, and by that it's your Uber, it's your taxi, it's your sort of slightly autonomous vehicle. It's the first and last mile, but by that very nature, those tend to be for 1 or 2 people. So if you can start to get mass volume transport into more individual vehicles, and we're doing a number of projects in this at the moment, then you can see that has a resonance now, is that maybe it's only for 2 or 3 people in one small vehicle. And if you can see what's happening in China, Hong Kong at the moment, you can see what may be happening in the rest of the world, where maximum of 3 or 4 people will convene. Then these smaller modules of public transport may have a resonance. And I find that interesting because they're easier to clean, but also then you know who you're with, and there's more control. So I think that is quite interesting. And then particularly when you can then combine that from being able to go, instead of going from a point to another point and then changing transport and then going to your home or destination, to be able to take seamlessly one form of transport, these little modules that take you all the way. There are lots of advantages of that for many reasons, quite apart from the current situation. And those are projects we were already working on, which I find quite interesting. So some of those projects will come through more quickly because they're in development. So I do, you do think about, mass transit, which I'm particularly interested in, but also then looking at how we reuse existing infrastructure in a different way. We have roads, we have railway lines, we have lots of different things, and how can we reuse that given the new circumstances? And I think human beings are very resourceful. And I think design and thinking and innovation has everything to do with solving that problem.
Absolutely. What would your advice be, finally, then, to a young designer at the moment? I mean, it sounds like be resourceful and keep thinking, but what would your advice be?
Think deeper than anyone else. I mean, that's the trick. I mean, you've got to. In fact, I was talking with a young engineer designer from Imperial yesterday who contacted me and just wanted to have a chat about one of his projects. And I was just saying to him, lots of people have had this idea before. So what are you bringing to it? Think deeper, push it before you design. I get very frustrated with designers that sort of almost get to the solution too quickly and then just design it to make it look nice, when really what's important is how it functions and what's the reason for it. So I think thinking, as I've said before, but also drawing, sketching, and using this time to really get to the nub of what it's all about. Design is not just about making something look beautiful. For me, that's a given. Of course, it's going to be beautiful, and there are lots of great designers out there making things look beautiful the whole time. But it's the subject matter and it's the thinking. Just like with the exhibition we had at the Design Museum on Get On Board about the materials that used in travel and the wastage in eating and traveling, the output, and how can we solve that, and just really getting to the nub of the issue.
I think of you every time I eat. I want a spork.
The spork.
Your spoon and fork, yeah. On which note we should end. Paul Priestman, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.